Welcome to this, our third webinar talk for the Consultancy Specialist Group of the BCS. Today we are talking about strategic engagement of IT and business, and in particular roadmaps and managing demand. Our speaker this evening I'll introduce in a bit more detail later, but he's already up on screen there. That's Alan Moore. He is also the chair of this specialist group, so he's our boss as well as being our guest speaker. And then also helping to look at the questions and basically press buttons at the right time, we have Antonio Hidalgo, who is also a committee member. Me, I'm Simon Wallace, one of the committee members of the specialist group. So for anyone who just missed my preliminary remarks while you were joining us, a couple of things to know about this session. We will be using some polls. When a poll appears, it will pretty much take over your screen. There'll be a big poll and there will be a question with multiple answers. All you need to do is pick an answer and press submit. Very easy, very quick. You just need to click on the button. The other thing you might need to find is the question system if you want to send us a question. On your screen at the moment, either you will have your control panel open, in which case you'll find the question section, I believe, at the bottom of that. And alternatively, if it's closed, you'll find there should be a little red box with a white arrow, which basically opens and closes that control panel. On my screen, it's top right. No idea where it is on your screen. So in terms of what's happening next, this is now our last session before the summer break. So we have no talks scheduled for August. We do have a program kicking off again in September onwards, and got some exciting things lined up. We've got a session on how AI could be disrupting project management. I've got a session on selecting cloud providers, got a section on how you run a successful consulting business. All of those yet subject to confirmation, so we're not yet releasing the details of that, but should be out soon. Anyway, let me tell you a thing or two about Dr. Alan Moore. It says here, Dr. Alan Moore, BA, MBA, MSc, PhD, CITP, MBCS, FCMI, FIC. It's probably all you need to know. And, he is a practicing IT transformation consultant. He's also joined us many times before with talks around the IT and particularly strategic engagement area. So I don't want to waste any of the airtime by going into more detail when Alan knows his own story far better than I do. So let me just hand over to Alan.
Thanks, Simon. Just to welcome everybody to the talk and thank you for coming. And to, well, let's launch into it. It's a very contemporary topic. So about the presentation, first of all, let me kind of position this for us. And forgive me if the technology is a bit funky at times. So our topic today is really flowing out from this area of IT engagement between the IT departments in large organizations and the businesses and business units. And this has been a challenge for a long time. In November, we did a talk which was a kind of overview of this area, which went down really well and people really enjoyed. And one of the areas that they wanted a little bit more on was the areas that we're looking at today, which is the area of demand management. And you would think that, or people might think that this is a straightforward area, but it turns out to be really, really difficult. It's been difficult for decades. The IT departments are overwhelmed oftentimes, and it impacts dramatically the relationship between the IT department, which works really hard on behalf of the firm, and the business units, because the IT departments have for quite a long time been struggling to meet the demand. And so demand management becomes quite critical. And as we look forward into a recessionary period where IT budgets will undoubtedly come under pressure, managing the demand within the constraints that we will face will become even more important. So that's what brings us into this topic. I'll position it a little in a second, but the agenda is really quite straightforward. We're going to just position it within strategic engagement generally. I don't recognize a lot of the names on the screen from the previous talk, but the previous overview of strategic engagement between IT and the business is on the BCS site. If you go to the consultancy specialist group site, you can find it quite easily and view it. It's on the NAPTO, the system that we were using before, but both the slides and a video of the event are there, and very, very useful too. I say so myself, but useful particularly for those engaged in this space. But nevertheless, we'll just position this talk with a brief overview of that and the challenges that come from that, and then move into why governing demand is so difficult within IT, and then into a set of techniques really, which I'm hopefully will be useful to you. And I'm going to really major on 4 techniques and position them for 4 techniques for demand management, which are proving useful out in the field. And those are roadmaps. We used to call them strategies, but roadmaps are becoming a more contemporary name for them. How we manage the demand for ideas, ideation, innovation, and then managing demand as a portfolio management of the demand. So that is the agenda, and we will move on through it quite quickly. A bit about myself. I am a practicing IT professional, chartered IT professional, but I do several things. I'm an IT management consultant. I focus on strategies and engagement in the main, but I'm a chair of a specialist group at the BCS. I am a researcher too, and have done research out from LBS and postdoctoral research since, and I do lecture from time to time at business schools, mainly in London. And in this field, I've clocked up a lot of experience. My PhD is in this field, and so not surprisingly, my work has gravitated into this. It's been a combination of consultancy with some significant consultancies like PA, and engagement roles, interim, over the last few years in some blue chip organizations in both the private and public sector. So what I will be presenting will be a bit of a mashup of research, practice, and my experiences. It's worth kind of just positioning the topic, I think, so that, excuse me, we know you can see it's how it fits in. So we're at the BCS, and not surprisingly, our topic is in the field of IT, but it's really in the field of corporate IT this evening, and it is a specialist topic within the work of our specialist group. Many of our topics are quite wide-ranging, but this is very specialist. It's really focusing into those challenges that corporate IT faces around demand management, managing what the needs that are coming out from the business, the area of doing that whilst maintaining good relationships and good engagement with the business engagement management, and doing all that whilst managing tight IT budgets and keeping the IT department's capabilities up to date and well run, which is an accountability that the corporate IT department inherits or gets delegated to from the executive committee, executive team. So it's positioned, this evening's work is positioned really in the area of post-experience. If one was a student on a computer science course, this would be of peripheral interest, but it may be difficult to relate to it. It's also worth saying that the knowledge in this area is emergent. There are many areas of IT where the knowledge is very specific and very empirical. Indeed, some areas where we know very well how to do things, but this is an area which I will put my hand up immediately and say, those operating this field are still learning how to do it well. Aren't any ISOs. It gets treated, touched on in frameworks like ITIL, but it is very emergent, and organizations are doing it in various ways, and we'll see a little bit of that during the evening. And the aim really here is that you go away a little bit stimulated, that there are opportunities out here for you personally and for the IT departments that you work in to improve what we're doing over time, and indeed to contribute back to the efforts that are underway. It has relevance for really IT managers and IT consultants, but also potentially for the business side, the CXOs, the senior executives who see these challenges and wonder about them, and transformation professionals who are heaping demand from the business units onto their various IT suppliers, internal and external. And but it is worth just saying that it is a topic which has more relevance for large, complex organizations with internal IT providers. It is they who have the biggest challenges in both engagement and in demand management. It is they who have the most complexity when it comes to creating IT roadmaps. But the problems, the challenges and opportunities exist in both the public and the private sector, and in high-tech organizations and low-tech organizations. So it is a widespread challenge and opportunity for those large corporate IT departments. So that's what we're going to be looking at, and I think it would be good to try a poll. Should we try out a poll? It would be interesting to know what your role is in IT. So I think it'd be interesting for you to know what the other attendees are, which parts of IT or business they are coming from, but it was very interesting for me as well, and also allow me to tailor the content a little bit too. So I'm going to launch a poll, and this is the first poll I've launched, so bear with me. And here we go. From which part of IT do you come? I've given you a few options. Choose those options, and we will see how it pans out. Okay, well, thank you for voting. I'm going to close the poll now. Okay, so you see that about a third of us are from consultancy, and in this space there is quite a lot of consultancy opportunities. Approaching half are IT managers, a quarter from IT specialisms, who indeed experience the overload from that typically comes from the demand not being able to be managed well. And we have a few others and a few from business management. So that for me is really useful information, but it also is encouraging that we have the right kind of audience. Good. Okay. All right. Okay. So let's just launch into this area of engagement. It's I don't, if you remember the film on the Bletchley Park code breaking, right back at the dawn of IT, engagement between the business, those who have demand, and the IT professionals, paid by Convergence, was depicted, and that is certainly the case. We've struggled with IT engagement issues from the very dawn of IT and through to the current day, and we continue to do so. And this is some research out of McKinsey. It's really is a great research that McKinsey did 3 or 4 years ago. But to summarize it, it shows that the current role of IT as perceived by their organizations is very much that of supplier in half of cases. And when organizations are really looking for their IT to play a more partner role and to partner up with the business. But there is a gap between what actually comes about. Oftentimes we are acting and forced to take roles as order takers, suppliers of IT into the organization, whereas we as IT professionals know, and the business senior teams know, that what's really needed as Convergence takes IT into ever increasing importance is a partnership, and in that gap there is a lot of value lost, and a lot of value lost. Okay, and looking at that the research by McKinsey, they went on to look at, well, in those organizations that do engagement well, effectively, what kinds of things result from that? Well, those organizations that have a much higher likelihood of being effective in things like implementing bottom-up ideas, bringing ideas for new solutions to the business, partnering with the business to develop new capabilities, support business capabilities that is supported by IT, proactively engaging, and also delivering projects on time. So the engagement is very important for the kinds of things that gives the business an edge, and also gives the IT department an edge in terms of its performance, and that's coming through very strongly from McKinsey. Another poll, perhaps. So let me kind of rerun the McKinsey work, but with you. So I'm going to launch another poll. If you could also respond to that. So what role? Oh, sorry. Let me just. What role should IT play in your organization? So should it be a partner? Should it be a consultant? Should it be a supplier? What is the role that in your organization should it be playing? And this could be a kind of mashup of your own views and the sentiments of your organization, your team. Okay, and you should be seeing the results. I can't see them on my screen in the way that you are, but you should be seeing the results now. I'll jump in, Simon, if that isn't the case. And so 90% of us are responding that we should be partners. And I deliberately allowed us to have multiple responses, and some of you have noticed that. And so we're also needing to play in your organizations the role of consultant and supplier. And of course, yes, that's a really great response that does in many ways reflect the McKinsey work. And another poll, if you'll let me, which is, that was what it should be, but what is it now? So this one is really speaking to where are you now? So this is kind of what is the dominant roles for IT in your organizations in its relationships to the business. Hopefully you are able to see this, and you can see that as I said, I'm intrigued by the others, but 70% of you are in IT departments or roles where you are being required to act as a supplier. A third are in roles where, in IT departments, where there is partnering going on, and it's a different relationship. And we've got this greater than 100%, showing that I think that in contrast to McKinsey work, that actually in our organizations we're having to take on several different types of roles. So really interesting there. But you can see the gap in those two polls amongst ourselves is not dissimilar to the work that was coming back from McKinsey. And over interpreting, we seem to be in slightly better shape than the McKinsey poll showed 4 years ago. So maybe progress is being made. Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to hide that now. And so that kind of it illustrates, I think, the pretty much where we are today, and the scale of the challenge of the lost value that is there. Imagine if we can get our IT organizations into better shape and doing more of that partnering, in addition to being the supplier perhaps and the consultants. This is a quick quote from Joe Pepper. Many of you will have come across him if you operate in this field. He's at MIT, and he's one of the current gurus in IT management, particularly around the role of CIOs and corporate IT departments. But he's making the point that convergence is upon us. And I find this resonates. I think it will resonate with quite a few other people as well. But he's saying that when companies feel they have a problem with IT in that kind of engagement area, the routes they typically follow is to restructure IT, replace the CIO with someone with new ideas, maybe appoint digital czars, or perhaps even look to third parties to run IT for them. But that's a bit like rearranging the deck chairs on Untitled Challenge. He's telling us is not to design the more digital savvy IT units. We are pretty digital savvy, I would propose. The question is how to organize the entire firm for success with technology, and that's fundamentally different. And so, I kind of, it resonates because I've been in organizations, I've had clients who have been in that first case where they have been restructuring IT, replacing the CIO, trying new things, outsourcing, but still the problem remains and the challenge remains. But I think also within Joe's comment here is that rising importance of this topic, that organizations are heading towards digital convergence, and that partnering is key to getting the business and IT working closely together. Okay, so a quick look at some of the challenges. This is a model which I won't dwell on because we covered it previously in the previous session, and it's in the slide deck, but it's a very common model. It's a mishmash, it's a mashup of various models from various eminent groups, the BRM Institute in the States, CSC, Vaughan Merlin, who is an author in this field, and others, that illustrates that we've got our organizations are on a maturity curve. From being order takers, suppliers in the McKinsey research, through to strategic partners, and it's a kind of journey that we are on, and we have to work our way through these levels, and both business side and IT side working together. And it is not an easy journey. As we can see, some of our organizations are further up than others, but we're still very much down in the early part of the maturity curve in the main, and being highly motivated to get it up to these high levels of strategic partnering, but it is not easy. One of the responses to this has been the emergence of specialist engagement roles. I'm sure we've got some BRMs and in with us today. And so specialist engagement roles are emerging in the large corporate IT departments. They have a variety of titles: engagement manager, business relationship manager, IT business partner has become very trendy recently. But they are specialist roles working to help to get up that maturity curve and taking these kinds of activities, contributing actively into the partnering between IT and the business, promoting the business into IT and IT back into the business, almost in an ambassadorial role, contributing significantly into strategy, which is where we are today, through areas like demand management and road mapping, where they facilitate a lot of what is going on, helping to translate what the IT department is saying into the business, because the languages are very different, and vice versa, because the languages are very different, and acting as an analyst, marketeer, and helping also, in many cases, to try to raise the innovation quotient of organizations in the field of technology. It's really important that for many organizations that they get their innovation right, and these new roles are playing an increasing role, making an increasing contribution. Yeah. These roles are amongst the fastest growing roles in the IT management community worldwide, according to the BRM Institute in the States. And I just need to have a shout out at this point to Deloitte, because this is a slight adaptation of work at Deloitte in their BRM team, not their consulting team, to find a pithy way of describing what these new roles are currently active within. But the overall contribution is to take advantage of the opportunities that we saw in those earlier pieces of research. I've included in the slide deck, for those of you who are BRMs, or indeed are CIOs, or have an IT management role where engagement is a significant part of your job description, I've included some slides on the main activities that that organizations are commonly doing at this time under those various headings. It's a kind of checklist almost, and has proven quite useful to me and to others. Again, a shout out to Deloitte for some of this work. Okay, so let's turn our attention into that area of strategy, and into that area of partnering, and in particular into how does the IT department manage the demand from business units. So first of all, the scale of the challenge. I think that many of you will be very familiar with this situation, where what the business is asking for is far too much for the IT budgets to handle well, and oftentimes what the business is asking for is only a proportion of what they truly need, the underlying demand, and this kind of gap emerges of excess demand for IT in the corporate IT arena. And you would think that surely, if I go back to my economics training or my MBA, surely this should work its way through. Either more funds should be given to shift the supply curve, or prices should rise, the IT department charges more. Why is this so persistent? And there are some fundamental reasons why equilibrium just does not seem to be reachable. One of them, and I kind of listed a few of them out here. They're not an exhaustive list, but I think many of you will have experienced some of this. So, funding deficiencies. It is quite remarkable in some ways that some of our IT areas are funded quite lowly. If you look at local government or NHS, two client areas that I work in, it is amazing that the levels of funding are quite low. So in the NHS, funding for IT is around about 2% of overall healthcare spend in the NHS, and it's been pretty consistent. Maybe it's a little bit higher than 2, but not much, and that is quite low. And so it's hardly a surprise if funding is in that level, that demand for such a for technology with such potential will exceed what the IT departments can typically provide. But it's compounded also by the fact that in many cases we find it very hard to recharge back for many of the IT costs, and so we decide not to do that. Top slicing is very typical, and that creates a free good. And so going back to our basic economics, a free good just leads to very high levels of demand. And compound it further, we have capability issues in our organizations, in the IT departments. There are always areas which are very topical, very new, and for which we are trying to build capabilities, and those capabilities become constraints. So there's a combination going on the supply side of funding and difficulties in charging or reflecting back costs and constraints. But on the other side of the equation, there are also things compounding this. So it is extraordinarily common in my practice to find that organizations on the business side have been incredibly optimistic about costs of an IT project or an IT change or transformation or innovation. Optimism bias is a feature of this area. Whole areas of cost are not included, and that can cause the IT initiative, the IT demand, to be overly attractive from a cost perspective. When I was working at one organization, they had a real problem with their projects always seeming to run over cost. And so what I introduced there was the idea that in the IT business cases, the assumption would be the scenario would be run through that the cost of the IT project is 3 times what is being estimated in the early stages. And if the business case falls apart, then that needs to be given some serious consideration, because indeed the research shows that cost overruns of that nature are quite common. Indeed, they're quite common in other areas of engineering as well, like HS2 and Crossrail. But we've also got issues around benefits optimism. It's very common for benefits to be put into the case for IT. The IT demand should be serviced, which are not going to generate cash. So I can remember from my practice finding that one organization, it was a IT service organization, was claiming to one of the clients that the work in another larger similar organization had been incredibly successful and saved a lot of money. But when we looked into it, because the CIO was very hard-nosed and savvy, what we actually found was that whilst this project, which was using business intelligence for identifying lighting problems in a city, and finding the association with crime, whilst it had reduced crime, was an incredibly useful thing to have done. The policing costs had not changed. So there were benefits, but they were not cash benefits. And so I found it really quite useful to try and push back on this optimism bias by looking at making a distinction between cash releasing benefits, cash realizable benefits, and non-cash benefits. And that brings better into focus, particularly if we have a cost optimism issue brought into play, the real nature of the case for the demand that is coming forward, and begins to often this isn't met with great welcome, but begins to bring more empiricism, more validity into the case for some of the demand, and taking some of the demand away naturally because the case does not stack up. And similarly with risk as well. It's very, very common for risk in UIT projects, whether it's coming from the technology or from the supplier or from the business environment, not to be sufficiently well articulated in demand for new IT. But either ways, we have got a lot of challenges out there, and that gap is almost hardwired in. There's things that we can do, but it is extremely common out there. I won't dwell on this, but from my own PhD research, people might think, well, actually, why does this not get solved by powerful people engaging and politicking and the kinds of normal ways that organizations often sort out these resource scarcities? Well, it turns out that actually, many of you will have probably experienced this. Politicking is really not good news for IT. Where what my research showed was that, amongst many other things, was that the politics actually gets in the way of IT being able to be managed strategically and to deliver strategically. And there's a number of reasons for that. It's as engineers, we don't naturally identify with politics as a way of making decisions. Our power as IT people over the monopoly is diminishing, and it's also a bit of double-edged. If we get involved too heavily in the politicking organisations to get those demand issues dealt with, then we risk that engagement and capital that we need to do our day-to-day jobs well, by engendering a toxicity between business and IT. And the bottom line is that many of the problems that we encounter, which aren't overcome by people driving things through with power. So not a lot of hope there. Moving on to things which do seem to be working in this field. As we turn to IT demand, I'm going to make a contrast between some of the easier bits. They're not easy, but easier of areas of IT demand for which we have mechanisms in place for managing demand, which get us quite a long way. And then I'm going to go on to those which are far less easy and for which mechanisms are still really under early development. So these are the ones which are worth just kind of bringing into focus briefly, because we won't dwell on these. But we've got demand coming through from our support desks, and that demand falls into ITIL ways of working, and by and large, I think organisations are doing a pretty good job of being able to manage the demand, forecast it, and operate in the support desks. And similarly, for those services which are in the IT services catalogues, are well developed, are published out to the organisation, priced if recharge is applicable. Again, the services catalogue is a way of being able to publish opportunities or publish services to engage through a common portal the business in commissioning those services and monitoring and developing those services going forward. And similarly, they're probably a little bit more difficult. For IT projects that are in flight, we have the growing importance of the IT PMO, project management or program management office. And for those that are larger in flight, we have the PPM and PMO2 methodologies, and the growing skill that we're developing in the PMOs. And so those areas are of IT demand are under good management, I think. So it doesn't mean it's easy or perfect, and there isn't more opportunities, but those are areas which we can kind of manage better because they are more forecastable. But there are whole areas which are inherently unknowable, and we're doing less well and having to develop new techniques for these. One of them is that translation of the business objectives and business strategy into IT, and vice versa, the ability of some IT, particularly platforms, to generate new business services. So and that is much more difficult to get a handle on, and has traditionally fallen into the areas of IT strategies and roadmaps. And I'll come back to these a little bit, but we do have techniques for this area, but they are quite difficult. A bigger challenge, perhaps, is that the IT strategies and roadmaps don't encapsulate everything. Typically, about 60% of demand is surfaced in those, maybe a little bit more, but not much more, because an awful lot of demand comes through in an area that is increasingly called ideation. Not a great way of describing it, but people identify ideas for using a technology in their business units, and those might be ideas that have occurred to them recently, or indeed they can be things which just occur. So a regulator decides that they want something done, and as in my experience on one occasion, and all of a sudden there is a new piece of demand which is coming through. And how does that get handled is an increasingly important challenge, because those ideas needs to be handled well for a number of reasons, but there's value encapsulated within them, and people love their ideas. We'll come back to that. And the other area is around innovation, and particularly the timing of innovation. Much more difficult to know what innovations the businesses should be working on, experimenting on, but timing is really important when it comes to innovation. You get left behind and you are catching up and investing in things where the value has already passed down to the consumer. Get the timing correct, what is right for your business, then you can create enormous amounts of value from IT innovation. But we are challenged across our organizations on this innovation front, and so but there are ways of emerging for handling all three of these areas. This area of IT demand, it's also worth just flagging up that there is quite a bit of governance complexity involved in IT demand. There are both business and IT governance forums in play typically, and financial and project governance in play too. But there's also an increasing emphasis, in my experience, on the protective functions in organizations, things like legal and risk, security, procurement, architecture, change management, those kinds of functions which are there to make sure that the organization is run well and is protected from the high levels of risk which can come about. And we do see instances of IT demand not being handled well enough in some organizations and doing reputational and other damage. But it's just worth saying that the IT demand management is a complex governance regime to work through. Let's focus on roadmaps then.
Alan, do we have time for a question?
Yes. Let's before we go into roadmaps, let's just pause for questions. Thanks, Antonio. What questions have we had?
We have one question from Mr. Byron, and in page 21, in an area where politicians impede IT success is getting to the point where a project is approved. It asked point 3. How can IT front door processes be optimized to help actually get a project safe and started?
Yes, that's a great question. So, if I'm understanding the question correctly, I think the question is speaking to the experience which I'm sure many of us have had, where projects that shouldn't be approved or are not really in a fit shape for the IT department to take on, have nevertheless get approved through politicking. This can happen in, for example, in large Big Four consulting firms where powerful individuals like partners just want it to happen, and they have the organizational power to make those demands and expect them to be followed. But the IT department to do well does need the demand to be shaped. It needs to be shaped in a variety of ways, and we'll come on to that a little at the moment. But and if it isn't shaped, then the IT department can end up with a whole set of negative downsides. A premature decision on what technologies can use can overly complicate downstream the technology architectures and disrupt attempts to get architectures congruent. The IT demand, if it's pushed through politically, can enter an IT department which doesn't yet have the capacity and capabilities to deliver it, and is really just set up to fail. So there's this, I think, is not uncommon. And of course, this feeds through into the reputational damage of the IT department and into impacts upon the relationship between IT and the business. And this is really difficult to handle. I think most of my experiences have often found that it's too late by the time that happens. And so it's not always. Sometimes you can begin to pull back on the decision and begin to add information in. I find that works well, particularly with BRM, bringing forward subtly more information for the powerful individual who's pushed it forward, because oftentimes they don't want to be associated downstream with IT problems. And so if you can bring that to attention, then that can be helpful. But I think the real effort really has to go into the process rather than the particular instance. Oftentimes the horse has bolted, and we can do nothing about those once they've been driven in politically. But encouraging our organisation and developing an organisation to have more rational approaches to these kinds of areas, and to bake them into the processes, the rules, and the governance is I think the direction that organisations are increasingly beginning to take. But it isn't easy. Organisational power, we can push things through prematurely, and before the demand has really been shaped appropriately.
Thank you, Alan.
Thanks. Okay, so I mean, IT roadmaps are one of the ways in which we can bring rationality into IT demand management. And I'm sorry about this slide, but I thought I'd just kind of quickly reflect back that if we go back to the very dawn of IT, when Leo at Lions was being created, the initiation of the main part of that project, because there was a bit of pre-work done, but the initiation was through a costed 5-year roadmap, detailed first year, less detailed latter years, and the same is true of the early project at GE in the US, which was around about the same sort of time. There's some debate about which was the first to initiate the information age in business, but it was those were two cases, but both did this through a long view. And indeed, why would we not do that? I pulled up because I was privileged early in my career to help the NHS initiate IT strategies roadmaps in many years ago, working with John Ward out at Cranfield. And so I pulled up a fairly recent roadmap from the NHS just to illustrate what is going on in these kinds of roadmaps. So what is going on in IT strategies and IT roadmaps is that the business and the IT department are putting aside time and resources and sitting down together and working through how does what the organization intends to do in business terms, how is that going to map out, how's that going to happen over the next few years, and what are the IT implications for it. It's easier to say than to do, and it usually involves facilitated support from either internals, sometimes from consultants, and quite a lot of workshops and meetings as people work their way through this. But it has been for some time possible to create these fairly good roadmaps, and this is a particularly complex example because this is a roadmap for digital in a local healthcare economy. And in this period, the NHS insisted that local healthcare economies created digital roadmaps to improve what they call their digital footprint, the use of digital for healthcare. And you can see, you can't see it well on the screen, but you can see that what is going on. It's capturing the things that we need to do in the shorter term. It's also laying out in those boxes the really big things that we're going to do, and looking at the challenges and issues and why it all makes sense. And this is the one-page summary from a very large document of about 60 pages from memory. So these are substantial pieces of work, and that is one of the reasons why many people don't do them, is because they are a lot of effort, but it's very worthwhile effort. And the alternative, which is to not have a forward view, is really problematic for IT. You can kind of see as you look at this, that this helps the IT department, the CIO, to really get ahead of the game. Instead of reacting to demand orders as they're coming in a fairly hard to predict way, there is essentially a long-term agreement for a large proportion of the demand. And in truth, as an IT professional, I cannot understand why organizations don't place more effort and more weight on developing jointly these roadmaps. A lot of my work has been in this area. It is very doable. A medium-sized hospital requires support, perhaps from one person for maybe 6 to 9 months, maybe 2 people part-time, to facilitate such a process through a series of workshops, outputting a roadmap. And it is of really fundamental value, because there are some reasons why it is a challenge. It does cause people to have to sit down and think. It does become a bit of a commitment, and the organization and people sometimes have difficulties in making the decisions and committing to things. But that's the role of the facilitators, to help an organization move through. And I think BRMs are increasingly capable of doing this, not always given the permissions, and engagement managers and business partners, but not always given the permissions to engage in this. But it is a very worthwhile area, and does give a very good handle on the IT demand, which is flowing out from the way the business and its sector are developing. I'll skip over this onto just a key insight from a research and consultancy, and this is quite valuable. I found, and many others, that it is really helpful when one is running a road mapping exercise to bring in insights from many of the areas that you can bring it in from. So it is certainly possible to create a roadmap by getting the IT department, the IT management, to sit down and decide what is right for business. Some organizations do that, very few these days, but in the past that was more common. It's certainly possible to get consultants to do it, or indeed to let the business do it themselves. But what is much more effective is to construct your discussions and your workshopping so that all of these constituencies are brought in, because they have different perspectives. So the IT department and the technology providers, internally and externally, all have particular aspects of demand which they will know about, and also opportunities which they will know about. Consultants and advisory firms like Gartner can also play a role in bringing in things which the organization may not internally know about. And the business is a critical player in this, and although they may feel nervous, they don't understand IT particularly well. If they approach it from what is the business intending to do, and what can IT do in business terms, there is a great deal of potential that they can bring in. And some people, and I personally advocate this and have been involved in it, have also chosen to get the organization more widely involved in cross-organizational, multifunctional workshops, and different things come out from that, particularly around the experience that users are having, and things that are closer to them as consumers and the customers. So the best practice in IT strategies and roadmaps is to combine these things, and it's very situational, and there are all sorts of factors which will cause the configuration of an exercise to create or update or maintain an IT roadmap to be different from organization to organization. It is an emergent area. There isn't one size fits all, but these kinds of broad areas bring in a richness which doesn't come from focusing it in on one of them. I thought it'd be useful just to kind of contrast approaches to illustrate that point that it is very situational. So I just pulled out 3 from my own research and my own consulting experiences. So and so if we take the first one, and this is a genuine exercise I was involved with. The county police force actually formed an internal team of policemen and IT people, IT staff to run workshops. They got trained up in this area of IT road mapping or strategies, and ran workshops around the force, and internally amongst themselves created a really terrific IT roadmap, which had enormous amounts of buy-in because of who had created it, and indeed was award-winning. In contrast, equally legitimate, but a financial services firm, financial services, the style was quite different for creating the way forward. Basically linked into the corporate financial planning cycle. Each year, business units have a templated opportunity to communicate their IT needs and IT projects, and to work them up at a high level, and then that gets constrained down by the finances available to create a prioritized and selected IT plan going forwards, or IT roadmap. Another example, again quite different, new CEO gets IT consultants in, chain of childcare nurseries in this particular case, and it's mainly done with the involvement of managers through internal staff meetings and consultant support to create a new way forward, triggered in this particular instance by the need to replace the core information systems which have reached end of life. So some very different approaches, but that doesn't take away that this is probably for this area of demand. It has a technique which has a terrific potential and makes a lot of sense to the business. They have strategies, roadmaps, plans for all sorts of things. Should there not be one for IT? And so if when it's done, it does tend to be very valuable. Moving forward then to the problem that it is very difficult to capture all of the demand in that way, and there's a substantial amount of demand left over, which finds its way to the IT department. And what is not good practice is to find that what the business is doing is identifying things that they need, which have not been forecastable, have not been included in the long-term business plans and the IT roadmaps and so on. And they rock up at the IT department and find people they know and try to get things going. The problem is that many of those things need to be shaped, as our previous questioner alluded to, that they as they emerge in this kind of way, they need to be worked through. They usually are quite raw ideas, often triggered in quite bizarre ways. Maybe a technology provider has called them up or seen them at a conference. Maybe they've seen something even on the television, and maybe they've read something. But an idea has occurred, and they can, and it's usually quite poorly formed. So a technique which is gaining traction is labelled ideation in the IT services management tools and platforms. Is to have a demand shaping funnel, and to and to put it through, capture ideas, and then to put them through some level of rigor. And this is not always welcomed, I have to say. People have their ideas, they think they're great ideas, they may be, but they may not be. But the effort in following this kind of analysis is often seen as bureaucratic. But the alternative is far worse, which is the one alluded to in the question, that demand enters work and enters into projects and into the into the services portfolio in a very poor way. And so a couple of things here. This is again a bit of a mashup, but there's a kind of common approach emerging of working with the business units or the business initiator of the idea to work it up, make sure that there is sponsorship, that it has been thought through, bringing in the technology professionals to help shape it further. And I point in very strongly to two. I keep alluding to this, but actually there are a lot of risks associated with technology, and so rooting it into the scrutiny of the various protecting functions around the firm. These are law, these are security, information protection, procurement, financial investment appraisals, those kinds of things, is really useful early on as a way of getting things thought through and shaped up, which is not about the IT department doing it, but these other protective mechanisms playing in their expertise and shaping things up, and particularly around areas of risk. And I'm afraid that I've become increasingly convinced that, and I know it sounds bureaucratic, that both the business case is really critical. And typically IT business cases are not done well, has been my observation, but it can be really useful in helping to shape it, indeed helping to qualify things out and stem demand which shouldn't be coming through. And all of that needs to be in place, and it almost needs to be in the IT governance, hard baked into the IT governance through the the company's SMT, that unless these kinds of things are in good shape, it can't progress into a startup, whether it's a waterfall or a sprint approach, and fall under the governance of the PMO. So this kind of ideation funnel has a lot of potential to make sure that ideas are not half-baked, that poor ideas are weeded out, and good ideas get the support from around the organization that they need to flesh them out well, and then to use the discipline of the business case to make sure that what is being proposed is worthwhile, and then they become part of the roadmap. And indeed, much of this is going on in the road mapping process for those things which are covered by that process. I've listed here, and I won't dwell on, the kinds of protective mechanisms that they that need to take a look at it. I think from personal experience, a mistake is for the IT professionals, or indeed the BRMs, IT BRMs, to stand between these protective functions and the ideation in the business. It is better to connect them together and allow the things like information protection to be explained to the proposer of the idea. And again, a few contrasting approaches. Very briefly, just to illustrate that practices in this field do vary quite a lot. So NHS region, this is a few years ago, not that long ago, but a few years ago, trying to get digital health ideas progressed through, finding that there's a lot of digital health ideas in the region, but that they are proving hard to bring through. Creates an ideation support team out of nurses and doctors, trains them heavily, and finds some traction with that. So the idea of an ideation support team to be available move in and help shape up ideas and navigate them through those sometimes complex governance and protective forums is one approach. One which I've seen in several organizations is a kind of dragon's den approach. In this particular case, the CIO and CEO and CIO of this organization were worried about the low level of innovation and created a consultancy support team to help ideas be brought through into investment cases. When they were subjected to a dragon's den type review, a benevolent dragon's den it was, but got the attention of the top team, indeed in most cases the CEO, once they had been shaped into that form. And that's a really interesting way of bringing rigor into ideas, whether they're innovative or less innovative. And the BRMs are picking up a lot of this in many organizations. And in this financial services case, the BRMs become the point of contact for people with ideas to find support from themselves and from other parts of the IT supply ecosystem. And that is getting quite a lot of traction, I think, and what perhaps explains some of the growth in this area. It's clean, it's simple, it gives a simple place for IT to send these kinds of things. Okay, and let's just pause there, and time for a poll, I think. Let's think about the roadmaps in our organizations and how they are handled. So if you can kind of respond back with what's happening in your organizations around this. Is it very ad hoc? You know, we shouldn't be too judgmental. Different things are right for different situations and different levels of maturity in different sectors. But what is happening out there? Yeah, this is really interesting. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now and share it. And I'm just going to ask Simon if we can indeed see the poll.
Yes, we can see it. It's on screen.
Yes, could you tell me the results? I'm sorry about this, everyone, but the technology is not seamless.
Yes, very ad hoc is 28. IT roadmaps based on annual budgetary processes 20. IT roadmaps using some of the sources of insights 12. We combine sources of insights for the IT roadmap 32, others 8. So the biggest number where we combine sources.
Okay, and that I find very encouraging. So I think if we went back a decade or two, the picture would be far less developed. We can kind of see that we are kind of, and this reflects my experiences. We are kind of polarizing into those that are doing these IT roadmaps well, and we saw an example from the NHS earlier, and those which are falling back on less resource-consuming approaches, adhocracy, and budget-dominated approaches, or it's called administrative approaches in the research literature. But and some of that is about effort, but I think also some of it is about the fact that things have become very nebulous. A previous speaker a couple of weeks ago talked to us about the increasing fog in which organizations have to make decisions, and where things are very foggy for organizations, then there is a kind of temptation not to go out and engage. But it is encouraging that so many of you are using those kinds of advanced techniques, and the research again from McKinsey and Harvard on the impact that sophisticated approach, I call it a comprehensive approach in my work, has on the ROI from IT and the strategic contribution from IT is very significant indeed. So thank you for that. I just want to cover the third of the challenges and technique areas, and this is around innovation. we are entertained daily with tales of IT innovation leading to organizations to charge forward with new services, new business opportunities, and indeed new businesses. And IT is undoubtedly one of the most innovative areas in business. There, I saw a recent listing of innovative companies around the world. I think it was in Fortune, and the number, you'd expect Apple and Google and so on to be close to the top as they were, but the number of which are IT companies is quite extraordinary. So I think it's just worth reminding ourselves that almost all innovations, whether IT or otherwise, go through this kind of curve, where innovators adopt it, others come in later. There's a majority who come in a bit after them, and then there are the late majority and laggards coming in much later. And in IT, as in all things, the right time to come in can be different for different organizations and for different technologies. So if a technology is critical to the operations of an organization, then it is worth oftentimes innovating earlier than if it is of less importance to the organization, when we can allow others to experience the bleeding edge of innovation and then come in and as an early adopter, or maybe even as an early majority with the early majority. But that kind of is meant to highlight that timing in innovation is quite critical. And so paradoxically, I'm going to suggest from my work that we actually want to stimulate demand for innovation, but stimulate demand for the right type of innovation. Just as a quick aside, I showed you the document from the Leo project that kicked off the Leo computer, kicked off the information age. But 6 months earlier, it's interesting to just note that they had run another pilot using under the title of electronic computer, and they had used a very different approach. No, they had not used a long-term 5-year plan. Indeed, they had nothing more than a 3-month plan, and a very small budget, £550 a day. It's actually 15k in today's money. They borrowed equipment and used military surplus equipment, and all of this was to try and do some early experiments in parallel with looking at what the business use cases might be, and looking at an existing working computer at Cambridge called EDSAC. But they occupied an empty building, and they focused particularly on learning. And so this is very typical of how innovation needs to be handled. Large bets don't typically need to be placed at if you are entering the innovation early. If you're in catch-up, then you can end up in a different position. But early innovations that are important can be approached in this kind of way to good effect, and have been. I'm going to skip over this, but there is a very, very good framework for managing innovations through the life cycle from John Ward, also Joe Peppard, developed it further and makes the point that that new technologies start off being very innovative, but then later mature to becoming strategically important for those organizations that can use them strategically. And over time, they become commonplace and become just operationally important to the organization, but not giving an advantage. And then some of them become things which just need to be maintained, or and so on. And so there's a life cycle. And what is important is in the IT demand to make sure that the innovative things are being approached early, because by experimenting early, you're buying time to be able to shape them and get the timing right, and when the business value generated is at the highest. I'm going to skip over this as an example in any depth, but I'm going to just point out that one of the challenges I think that we have is how do we stimulate innovation the right type in our business units. And one of the key findings in this space is that it is really a bad idea to turn up as a techie and tell the business all about WYSI technologies and how they should be using them. It is much more effective to turn up as a business person and help them to understand and to identify opportunities for using technology to create new business services, new business productivities, new business products. And I think a key message there for BRMs and CIOs and IT engagement people to make sure that mistake isn't made, because your credibility doesn't last very long. I found great traction, and others too, and indeed Microsoft are beginning to use this technique. I can't claim that they've got it from me; they've arrived at it independently. But what I found is that there is a great deal of value in investing time as a BRM or an IT manager in investigating, in researching what is happening in new technologies, and in business terms, what use cases are working for new technologies, and ideally, what organizations that the business will identify with can you associate with that, because they will respond better to stories of businesses that are doing these things than they will to admonitions from technical IT people, although both can be equally right. So I would point off to this technique, which is gathering traction. And here's some contrasting examples to show that things are quite different. A county council I worked with some time ago, CIO created a technology showcase facility that stimulated business ideas, a great way of pulling the business into new technologies. And it's interesting to note that actually that county council, through this, pioneered some new uses for digital in their sector from business people identifying it, and in many cases moving it forwards. Another example is around innovation workshops. You can do the research. I find that innovation workshops, in this particular case, this was with the economic development unit of the city, work better if as a BRM or a technology manager, I turn up with some stimulation to add into the workshop to get things going, and then I find that that from that stimulation, the business people can apply it and localize it and generate innovative ideas of their own, rather than trying to explain, rather than leaving them to do it without any seeding or stimulation. And of course, you can turn to external help, and some organizations do. The consulting teams, the big consultancies, all have teams that can help in this kind of space, and that can be quite useful, particularly if you need to break an organization out to do innovative things which are outside of their normal consciousness. So contrasting approaches, but there are techniques out there to help organizations to generate IT innovation ideas. It seems paradoxical when we're overloaded to be generating them, but I think my point really is that by generating them early and working on them early, we shape them up better so that they're easier to assimilate into the IT department. I'm going to leave for next time because I recognize that we wouldn't have time for this, but the role of business cases. But business cases, as I mentioned earlier, are a great way of bringing empiricism in. And as an IT department, if you can encourage the senior people in the organization to insist on rigorous business cases for significant IT demand, then that can help to make sure the right demand is coming through. The demand which doesn't make any sense is swept away, or at least the people are very hard-nosed and can see when the benefits are truly going to generate cash, or when they are just going to generate intangible benefits, both of which can be good. But I've witnessed a lot of claims which have not been for benefits which were unlikely to come about. So let's just continue with another poll, and if it's okay, I'm interested in how innovation is being handled in your organization. So I'm going to launch this poll. So are you good at it? Are you innovating, but maybe the timing isn't quite what it should be? You're not doing so well, or are you strangely, to me anyway, don't need to innovate? And that can happen if you are in some types of organizations where the real imperatives are in other types of business advantage coming from the market or from the core technology of the product. And you can see that actually it's interesting that not many of you think your organizations are really good at it and getting it right. And I think that is typical. 48% think that you are innovating, which is great news. Timing's not always perfect, and a fair proportion believe the organizations are not doing well, and I'm intrigued by the other, but we don't have an easy mechanism for exploring that. But yeah, that's kind of typical. And that represents a lot of value potentially being left on the table. And I emphasize my point that the timing and the way that we innovate, because those innovations will become the big projects downstream for the IT department, is quite important in demand management and demand shaping. Okay, I'm going to move on to the last topic, which is really to talk about what happens when we get this going well. Because the holy grail at the moment is to be able to get all of those areas of demand you identified and under a common demand management regime. And then we are seeing in some of the platforms for IT business management like ServiceNow, demand management functionality emerging within it. I don't want to, I've no personal interest in ServiceNow. I just pulled it up as an example. The other ITBM platforms are doing something similar, and indeed my experience is that this isn't too difficult to do using SharePoint in the past or the Power platforms now. But you can't see it particularly well from the screen, but down at the bottom is the captured demand, whether it's an idea or whether it's an innovation or an early stage of a project within the program in the IT roadmap. The ideal position is to get a uniform set of information out from them, and then you can start to slice and dice and check that, for example, the load on one particular part of the organization isn't too high, that you've got the right balance between innovation and strategy and operational projects. And in the example on the screen, which is essential to this particular dashboard and platform, they are using a RAG indicator to identify those areas of demand which are low risk and high value over those which are not in that category, which either need to be looked at or worked on or shaped further, or indeed if they're high risk and low value, identified as things which are probably, as they currently stand, are not worthwhile doing. But managing that demand as a portfolio brings in another set of benefits, and is probably, in my experience, the leading edge. Okay, and that is where I'm going to leave it. I have included a couple of slides earlier, a mashup of the information model that needs to be created in order for that kind of portfolio management to take place. So I'll include that as a reference should that be of value. But there is a balance to be struck with keeping the information at a high enough level that it is not overwhelming when you've got dozens, scores, sometimes hundreds of projects in your demand portfolio, against having it so high level that you can't actually discern meaningful things about the portfolio. So it's I've included that. Okay, so looking forwards in this area, I think this is. I just want to make the point that we are entering, or we have entered, a recession, and that means that IT budgets will undoubtedly come under pressure. But the underlying demand for technology is still there, and indeed seems to be growing. A lot of senior people saying that the new normal will be about technology-enabled transformation, and so there is a kind of paradox emerging, and that speaks to increasing importance and increasing challenges in the area of demand management. I mentioned the IT business management platforms, well worth looking at, particularly if you're already using them for other things. But there is quite a considerable effort needed in setting them up, has been my experience as I've used them. We mentioned digital convergence, that this makes the IT engagement areas, including demand management, much more important. And we have still coming at us a glorious and I think really exciting batch of technologies, for which innovation and early ideation will become really very, very important indeed. We really are blessed with very powerful technologies coming downstream. And I think that is where I will leave it. And I'll come back to Antonio now for questions. Antonio, what have we got?
Hi, Alan. We have a couple of questions from Val Green. The first question is, where is IT is a dominant driver in organization? What are the three main identifiers? And then we have a second question, also from Val. How often does lack of accountability, inclination with IT, contribute to lack of engagement with the rest of the business?
Yes. Well, thanks, Val. Those are really good questions. The first one I will struggle a little bit with, I think. What identifies organizations where the IT is a dominant driver? Yeah, that's. I think that is only comes out through from the business side. Strategies. In truth, the business being able to frame as it strategizes its way forwards, frame an articulation, a vision, perhaps of what the role of IT will be for that business, and it really does fall to the business to do that with the support of the IT department, working with them. The CIO often has is tasked with this, in my experience too, these days. But it needs to come from that kind of forward vision about the role that IT will play, and that can be partly bottom up. All this demand management stuff helps to frame what the underlying known demands are, but it's also partly vision, and it's classic strategy work. The second question I found quite fascinating too. The lack of accountability inclination within IT, that is a very perceptive question, Val. And yes, you've seen it. I think we've all seen it. It isn't irrational, and it isn't laziness. I would suggest that to characterize this is where something needs to be done. There is a piece of demand, but the IT community are unwilling to step forward and pick it up, and therefore the demand doesn't get serviced well. Sometimes it's kicked into long grass. Sometimes it just gets turned back. The business isn't clear about its requirements. They go and do some more work. And I would flag up within this that the BRM can get caught as a middle player in that kind of problem, where something is quite difficult. I'm putting some. Yeah, no, I won't give a specific example, but that can happen, and the BRM and those involved in engagement as IT managers need to always bear in mind that they do have escalation within their toolkit of things that they can do. So where BRM would be unwise to use escalation of those kinds of issues frivolously or frequently, but where it is important and it doesn't resolve itself by diplomatic and means, then then escalation is available, and CIOs typically do want to know about those things, because it is those small areas where the IT department lets itself down and is unable to service the demand that the business remembers disproportionately, and also offers up excuses for them to do shadow IT, to go out to friends in the IT industry, to go out to the cloud, to in many ways behave in a way which doesn't enhance or build the business IT community working together. The area that I do see a lot in the BRM space is BRMs stepping in sometimes where they can to make up for those gaps, particularly if you're a technical BRM, a BRM with a technical background. It is very attractive sometimes to, when you've exhausted the conversations and you know you're not getting anywhere, but you know it's important to the business, and you really don't want to do escalation to the CIO, because the CIO is typically very busy person to step forward and doing it. So I think that is probably a mistake, but I do know it happens. Why do IT departments inclined to take accountability? Well, sometimes it is that the capabilities are not there, but they don't want to admit it, and sometimes you have to kind of understand that technology specialism is simply not able to do yet what is required, and as a BRM, that is areas to take into the IT management team as areas where capabilities need to be built, and that really moves us back to finalize to the importance of that IT demand management, to be able to see capabilities, for example, in AI coming downstream, and to be shaping the organization, the IT department, to be building those capabilities before they arrive, because if the demand arrives and the capabilities aren't there, then it may get dispositioned to IT folks who just feel unable to respond, and will therefore find ways of being disinclined to take accountability. I hope those thoughts help. I'm very aware that I'm overrunning. Important topic though it is, there are also important other things to do. So I'm just going to come back to Antonio. Is that okay for questions?
Yeah, it is.
And Simon, are there any final thoughts to send our attendees away with, apart from my thanks for attending and for listening to what at times must have been quite demanding materials. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Alan, for that excellent talk. I'm sure we're going to have to return to that area several times again in the future, because there's a lot of content there. By the way, Val said thank you for answering those questions. Which brings me on to the only two things I did want to say. One is that we will hopefully be able to share the slides in PDF format as soon as we've got those. They will go on to the BCS specialist consultancy specialist group web page under the past events category, where you'll find the details for this session. And also, hopefully, we will have a link to a recording which will be up on the BCS YouTube channel, so you'll be able to replay the talk and the slides using YouTube as well. So beyond that, thank you everybody for staying with us, and hopefully we will see you all again in September when we return to our program with more of these talks. So that concludes the business for today. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. Thanks, Antonio.
Thank you very much indeed.